Yeah, when we were deciding who will introduce whom, this is like super weird. But yeah, and then immediately I said oh yeah, I'll do Jan and Sebastian. I mean, it's a great pleasure to have your heroes for friends, and that's what happens to me when I work with Jan and Sebastian. It's also kind of strange. I adore their work for years. I didn't really prepare. I did this quite a few times, so I knew that I can do that, and yeah, it's just coming. And this time I will also mention a few things which I didn't like last time. For example, these guys were also running a bar in Berlin, and that was equally interesting like all other projects, and that's kind of that comes with that kind of a play. But I think that probably the biggest thing I kind of learned and got from the work of Jan and Sebastian was the role and importance of the piracy, but not just the role and importance, but also the articulation. So it got quite a few years ago, before I heard, and before I think you met me, before the pirate political party went there, I was challenged because at that time most of the people were talking about Creative Commons and how that reform can work. And then these were the guys no, fuck that, no. and that same argument still stays, and still kind of, it's very strong. And then it kind of disappeared. At that time they had again the anecdote which you could hear from me. That for the first time in my life I heard terabyte in context with them, and I was like, a terabyte. I mean now it's nothing, you can buy it for 100 euros, but at the time when I heard the terabyte in the real kind of context, that was from them. So they came to Zagreb with a terabyte of movies. And people were asking how much this space we need to transfer that, and they're like, in between 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes. I was like, wow, it's just beyond any. And then I learned that all of these movies are actually great movies which people should see. I didn't, but I know that I should, because otherwise, yeah, it's kind of hard to be a good intellectual in these circles. I'm still lazy. And then they disappeared for a while, and then because there were no tools for browsing that library which they had on a hard disk, and they were doing a kind of a traveling, a pirate cinema which started in Berlin, and then they did amazing tour. I don't know how much of that you will show here, but it looks like a fantastic. It just it blows your mind. So then just from sorting 15,000 movies, it's technically very hard, and then getting them sorted by number of words in the whole movie, or number of words spoken per minute. Or then you can sort it out by red color, or you can sort it out just by the the number of cuts in a movie, or number of cuts per minute, and there are so many other things. And in a way, if Apple did it, that would be the way how we perceive the world of movies, but Apple didn't do that. And at the same time, it's not that much in use, and I think that's what I told you in Rijeka. This is the best media theory tool when they do that. So it's not maybe, it could be used by millions. It is used by quite thousands, but it's not used by millions. But it's still, I will just keep this here. I think that the best use of that amazing software is the media theory lecture. And yeah, that's what we will get here. And thank you for being here. Thank you.
So this is Jan, I'm Sebastian. I'm going to tell you what we... This is Jan, I'm Sebastian. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. First, I'm going to talk about some things. Then I'm going to show you some stuff that's pretty old. And then Jan is going to show you some stuff that's pretty new. And then we can have a conversation with you. And the stuff I'm going to talk about, I mean, it's not going to be that, but when I read a week ago the info on, like, some people had already submitted their titles of their. I was reading this last day closing panel that had the title like Institutions and Disobedience, and my impression was that our problem is the exact opposite of that. So if I had sent the title, which I think I didn't, it would have been from disobedience to institutions, or from organizing disobedience to building institutions, because I think, I mean, evidently, we don't know so much about it because we're so far outside institutions and academic, educational institutions, but apparently there's a huge demand for disobedience in this kind of, in these kind of circles. But as we're so far, to me it looks like we're in a different phase, like a different transition has to happen, is from this massive disobedience that is the past 20 years of piracy towards sustainable infrastructure, towards actual institutions. But before I do that, I have to say 2 words about text.com. First of all praise goes to Marcell for reviving this. It was solely his it was his persistence that made this happen. But point 2 is that it also needs all of your help. Text.com has not been released yet. It will be released in the form of an alternate reality game. That means that you have to participate and actually solve a few puzzles or challenges related to cryptography and neighboring fields to cryptography. You have to participate. If you don't manage to solve this, text.com will be gone. I mean, I'm happy to not publish it if you don't figure it out. So go to texts.com and figure out the starting point. It's much easier as long as you're in this room. So do it. A few of you should do it. But thanks to Marcell, this is happening. One last thing about text.com is that when I was reading the blurb that's printed on this paper back there, and maybe the copy somewhere else, I was surprised. I was not surprised, but I realized reading it that about, let's say, 30 to 40% of the blurb is the case, is the Adorno case. It's text.com versus Jan Philipp Riemsma versus the Hamburg Academy of Culture and Science or something, the kind of the proprietor of a lot of works by Adorno and Benjamin, which takes a lot of space in this kind of historization of text.com. And I see it's about historization. There's a lot of, I mean, you've brought together such a fabulous group of kind of net art, copyleft, like fossils or zombies or dinosaurs from past eras. Okay, if you look at this historically, then okay, this has its place there. But thinking about this place again, and it also wrongly, I think wrongly, and that's the point I wanted to make, which relates to what I want to talk about, wrongly claims that the shutdown of text.com was a direct relation of that conflict with Riemsma, which was about something like 4 to 7 texts. It was something different. Like, I realized while this affair was going on, I realized what kind of mode a project like text.com would go into. It was very much about a kind of a high profile. I mean, Adorno is a big name, Riemsma is a big name, and for text.com or me, that would have been the chance to, go to the big name, do something on the big names level, like journalists were calling, mailing all day. At the time I was working with 2 artists many of you will know, Übermorgen, Liz and Hans, who were at Bootleg, our organization in Berlin, and they were at the time doing things like voteauction.com. I don't know if you remember this. They ran a website where US citizens could actually auction off their vote in the 2004 presidential election. Like serious stuff. And they were sued in 13 states. They were on CNN twice a day. Like Bootleg had to be transferred to a TV studio for film crews, like on multiple occasions. And I just realized that, I mean, I totally appreciate their work. It's not a value statement. I just realized that this particular genre of art was not actually, or of producing stuff on the internet, was not actually the one I was engaged in. It just started to suck. It just seemed to be the logical kind of consequence to put text.com in this realm of I would say it's either it's either martyrs or marketeers that are required in this particular field of art. Like you make a sacrifice, but you reach a kind of a higher level in this kind of echelon of either. I think the martyr and the marketing are very close together in this. It's you can do both at the same time. It's both. It requires some of both of the martyr skill and the marketer skill. And I just realized that this wasn't exactly what I was doing, and there were many more projects I and people I was working with were involved in. So it became less and less urgent to run Text.com. It became less and less. And I mean, many of the abandoned attempts to relaunch Text.com are contained in the critical edition that all of you will have to discover. It's still interesting stuff, but in the end, and I mean, that's also, I think, the problem of the general issue with historization of this kind of era of net art / copyleft activism / piracy, that many historians look at the zeros, the past decade now, and they identify something like the golden era of file sharing. That was the time from, let's say, from Napster to the Pirate Bay, which still runs. The time when file sharing became such an important cultural paradigm, and most of these historians, they were, it will be battle paintings all the time. It's them versus them. It's good versus evil. It's heroes, villains, hackers, martyrs, marketeers, self-marketeers. There will be stories will be told, but maps will be made of these networks. But in the end, and that's what I realized during these kind of final 1-2 years of Text.com, that one, and I'm not the first person at this place and on this day who's mentioning this, that one has to kind of resist this representation mode if one realizes that that is not exactly how one operates. And it's one of the huge problems with, it's hard to compare these two levels of engagement, but the main issue with both WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden leaks, whatever the term for this is, that this is so much about representation, so much about personalization. There's so much time we spend on discussing people like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, and that there's so little time that we spend any of our focus on the actual materials they leaked and on the actual crimes they revealed. And there's no debate on, or hardly any debate on, what the consequences of these are, other than our hands are bound, we can't do anything, we're screwed or something. Or, we have to. So I find this a bit breathtaking, and that's one of the challenges I think in these breaking copyright within the arts, or breaking copyright within the context of media. That the force of representation is so strong, and it produces these kind of this kind of asshole persona that is Julian Assange. It's not about him. I don't care. I don't care about Julian Assange. It's just this kind of figure that is needed at the center of a leak or a huge kind of case of copyright infringement within the context of the art. It's just this persona is just, to me, not very. But it's not very attractive to be anywhere close to this point. But I think there's a tendency, and it's probably also time for historization of the past decade of piracy. But it's not that you can close the book on it. It's not that you can. I think the question has shifted a bit. To me, and a lot of what Björn and me are doing practically in terms of producing software, producing events, producing context, is that I think today we're no longer concerned with the question, how can individuals get access to individual pieces of cultural commodities, to specific instances of cultural commodities. This, I would say, is a solved problem. It's solved to varying degrees. It depends on where you are in the world, it depends on your gender, it depends on all these factors are still there. But in general, that's no longer a question that seems to be burning. In principle, individuals getting access to individual files, yes, there's infrastructure for that. But a more interesting or more pressing question at the moment seems to be, how do you build federations among collaboratives, collectives, pseudo or proto institutions that actually have own amass, collect huge amounts of data. Librarians, these kind of future librarians, these kind of folk artists, folk archivists that Ken Goldsmith refers to. How do you build both technical infrastructure and that kind of logistics for operating, and how do you produce actual meaningful context, which means spaces and discourse and imagery and certain many things. I mean, it takes long to enumerate all these to actually make their archives productive and to communicate to enter exchanges with other archives. How do you? It's not so much more about file sharing. It's more about how do you connect libraries. These can be stationary, but we all know, everyone who has a large library of media knows that you're not going to use the internet to copy it. You're going to put it in your backpack and you get on a plane, and that's how you transfer large amounts of data. How does this kind of sneaker net plus internet plus the terabyte era how will this come together? And I think that for many of these somewhat utopian ideas of connected, no longer connected individuals or individual files, but connected libraries, we already have probably half or more of the infrastructure. To me, I think for example, the model of the private torrent tracker, I don't have to name names here, but some of you will use them, some of you would have heard of them. These are at the moment, I think, the most advanced kind of cultural prism, if you will, the most advanced kind of both interface and community to begin exchanges of and around large amounts of data. Like there's fabulous trackers in music, there's fabulous tracker for film, there's fabulous trackers for texts, all kinds of materials. And I think in many cases, even though they're technically hidden or private or behind some walls or in gray zones of the internet, many of them have already become de facto institutions that many official institutions would collapse if they no longer had access to what comes out of these networks. And they're also better than, I mean, there's a lot of nostalgia that the internet kills kills radio and the record store and the video store, and there's so much, as a community, they're just so much richer and so much more diverse and so much more so much smarter than any of these fantastic record stores or video libraries that we used to visit if we're old enough in the pre-internet era. There's just no comparison because they're international, they're a lot more mixed, they're in direct exchange with the actual artists who produce a lot of the work. There's no, especially in music, it's a golden era for music thanks to file sharing and these networks and the kind of the collapse of the vision that in order to make it to something in your art, be it writing, be it making music, be it, you have to do it with the industry. You can, it's still an option, but there's not so much of an illusion of the author that has to. So this has changed. And I think to see the potential of these libraries, of these kind of interlibrarian, these places for interlibrarian exchange, one just has to look at the very opposite, at what's left if we don't solidify and expand this infrastructure, which is streaming services, like Netflix, Spotify, etc., that spy on us in exchange for like sanitized catalog of cultural commodities. That's not very big compared to what these kids are doing compiling on the internet. Has much better metadata, these trackers, than anything that commercially provided. There's social media that spies on us in exchange for, like, you get your position on a social graph. And there's cloud services that spy on us in exchange for whatever, entertainment, leaked celebrity photos. That's kind of the paradigm. And that's not, I think the question of the public library, the global digital archive, is not just a technological question, because as a technological one, it has already been answered by dozens of peer-to-peer reviewed and battle-tested protocols, but it's also a social one. It's how do we want to live with the archive, with all these files that keep us glued to our screens. How do you want to live without dead time in the archive, without the boredom and the paranoia that's being proposed by the cloud era, whatever. So in that sense, I agree with someone who spoke here before, yeah, fuck it. I mean, you can, and one has to build these and extend these networks. And we can show you a few kind of minor additions. I have to, before I show you something, I just realized that actually. I have to address one point, which is the fact that here in Germany at the moment here, there's a public discourse in Germany about all these things that seems so detached from anything that what we're doing. Like earlier this year, I remember vividly there was some of you may have read this, there was a Michael Döpfner, the CEO of Springer Verlag, Germany's biggest publisher, had a huge article in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung titled "Why We Fear Google," where he argued that even though Google is responsible for so much of Springer's profits because they're driving so much profit to the Springer properties online, that Springer was entitled to a fee for that service that Google provides from Google because they list quotes from Springer websites in search results. And so he was entitled to actually bill Google for the service they provide because this is, as he said, stealing content. And they fear Google because as a monopolist, they even though they provide all the benefits, it's an odd kind of configuration where the Döpfner or Springer or many people in positions like him seem to have internalized this new mode of society, which is like capitalism for the poor, socialism for the rich. That he's suddenly an advocate of privacy, for privacy issues, for all these kind of remuneration for doing things on the internet, which is absurd. And just very recently, 2 weeks ago, a spokesperson for VG Media, which is kind of an organization, it's like the GEMA for publishers, fantastic interview, fantastic radio interview, where they argued there's, according to German Leistungsschutzrecht, German publishers can actually claim, for them it's legal to claim certain compensation for other people quoting their stuff on the internet. So her argument was that Google had to start to delist certain German publishers that insist on compensation for being quoted in search results. And now VG Media argues that this is unfair. Like they asked to get delisted, but by delisting, Google had abused its monopoly power because the other publishers that had opted out was delisted, and that's a competitive disadvantage for those who actually claim German Leistungsschutzrecht, and they were coerced. These publishers who agreed to be still listed on Google had been coerced into actually doing this by Google's monopoly power, something like this. So this is the kind of high-level German national newspaper type of discourse that's being held on all these questions, and I think it's going to take literally decades. It's going to take a decade until we can speak again across this gap. And I think it's important to also keep that in mind, that we're in a very kind of far out place when it comes to visibility of our arguments in Germany. So this is just, I mean, some of you will know this is really old. I've given you pretty much the same presentation like 7 years ago. We've been working on this since. It has become a big okay. What is this? This is 0xdb.org. 0xdb.org is kind of the result of something we did in Berlin for a couple of 0xdb.org for a couple of years between 2004 and 2007, which was Pirate Cinema, which was a cinema for downloaded film. Super nice activity, and we ended up with we started it because we realized we had an archive of films, and we ended up having a bigger archive, and since we don't have the space anymore in Berlin to run Pirate Cinema, we still have the archive. Now this is just an example because I'm really serious about the question of building institutions from out of these practices of piracy, because we should have no illusions that the institutions we find now are all kind of white, or all kind of especially if you talk with people who archive film, like official film institutions, they would all, they know this quite well. This is all stolen material. This is all films not returned, kind of got from the cinema. This is most archives, and look at archives that are not media. Like most archives is stolen stuff on display, museums, etc. It's not that that all these film libraries and that they have acquired their materials legally, but in the kind of the internet copyright, digital rights management era, I think no one can do so much, or no one dares to do so much with film. There's these big commercial projects that are not so interesting. YouTube Netflix, Spotify, whatever. And then the cultural projects like from Europeana to, I mean, whatever their names are, but it's just a disaster, extremely expensive, and very, very close to zero in terms of results. These were just a few things that we thought like you should do if you have a lot of films, and we're not the only people who have a lot of films. Just a few proposals of what you can do when you have tons of films, which is and when we did this in 2007, we thought YouTube would have it super soon, but it's still like if you browse large amounts of film, you actually want to have some visual representation of the film. Why can't you? Why is XeroXDB the only website in the that I'm aware of that provides like this kind of basic, like, okay, what's again the blue stuff in Sucker Punch? That's how going down these snowy stairs. You don't find this if you sit in front of a DVD and look at the DVD cover. You want to, I mean, maybe you don't have the time to watch Home, but you see, this seems to be very kind of distinct. You see the cuts and you see it's actually quite interesting. You see how different films have super different, this is a joke, have super different, but it's a film too, have super different texture. If you, let's sort this by, it's by here. If you look at, this is James Benning, I guess, yeah. If you don't have the time to watch James Benning's films, at least you know what he does, no? You get a clear idea, so this director, what he's up to. He's making these, 10 skies, you know? Looks like 10 skies. It's actually, I'm not arguing that that's how you should watch films. Not at all. You should watch films, I don't know, in a cinema or on a beach or in a kind of, in a beautiful place, but if you're dealing with large amounts of archives, you kind of want to see this stuff, and for many purposes, either because you do film production, or because you are in film archive, or you do film studies, you can tell certain things about the language of film. If you see that, like for example, Godard 1967 has a very kind of distinct structure in his films, and the red stuff is the books, no, and then there's a red car somewhere. Let's try this. You don't find this with, so these are trivial kind of interfaces and surfaces for dealing with large amounts of film, and you want to, and it costs nothing. I mean, there's no labor involved other than we've programmed this stuff, but this runs on this is less than your monthly electricity bill or something. It just sits on a server somewhere and runs, and if you want to take a closer look at what actually happens, then you can take a closer look. That's just one of the things that it enables you to do, and that's so evident if you talk about like next generation film archives and film archives online. And you just run a few. That is a bit slowly, but will appear. That you just run a few algorithms on your films or books, for what it's worth, and see what comes out. This is. The other thing, some of you have seen this anyway. The other thing is, let's just go back to. So the other thing is, of course, if you provide large archives, and this is not just true for text, but also for film and music. You want to be able to search in them. So you want to be able to say, like, you want to search for something that you know appears in the movie, and then you really, I mean, it's trivial, but it's not. I find it still stunning how unique this still is, in terms of, because it's probably also because of the corpus that's there, that no one really wants to provide 15,000 downloaded movies and growing, but it's I'm not searching for that. So give me all the scenes where someone says, I mean, usually works.
Here, internet is not best. Yes, maybe. It's kind of. Bears has much worse electricity.
Wow, we just got so many results. I don't wonder that this didn't happen. you send me a link? Oh wow.
Oh, it's a million tips on the
yeah.
result.
It's just yeah, it took a while to render but let's do something that's a bit less taxing on.
Just recently, those who know French musicologists get the saying out, oh, I'll give everything to get all the scenes where somebody in film says, écoute, listen. So, oh, okay, that's easy.
No, it's super easy since this is going to load eventually. It's super easy since there's a whole art genre. This kind of everyone picking up telephone, everyone prominently watching their clocks, for example, which with USDB is fully automated. If you want to have someone else is doing this downloading.
Movies from
you can automate this. You can watch it as a film. Yeah, works better in internet with
yeah. So my OTV is a website, and it's something that we run. We thought maybe it shouldn't be a website, but something that runs on your computer, and maybe it's not only movies, but let's start with something else. So we started with books, and we started a project that is called Open Media Library, and it looks a bit similar, but in this case you see books, and you can organize them, you can they have some metadata associated with it. I just copied all the books that were on display here and put them in, so looking how that looks. You can read them, you can hopefully eventually annotate them and all these things, what we have done with OCB, but the idea is to do this more with different media and to do it. It is also running in your browser, but it's running on your local machine, and you are not only seeing your own books, but maybe also the books of other people that are either in the same network, and you can discover people that are in the local network, or you can connect with other people that are somewhere else in the world. There's this one user called Def that sits somewhere in...
I
did some change, but yeah, you can try to, you might show it. And so the index of all, the index is shared with the other users, so this other user only has 8 books, but you could look at these books, and if you want to read it, you click on, if you go on the library of Deaf, maybe...
The library of Deaf.
There's one, and there should be some, like if you click on these books, I think you have none of these are available. This one, yes. So this book, yeah, so this one you already have, but before we go. If you don't have the books yet, there's a read books. There will be a download button, and you click on download, and you start downloading the book from the other person. This is all peer-to-peer, and so it could be from anyone who has the book if you have multiple users. Well, this is still in a very early stage. We have people can start to play with it, and maybe over to as software development for these things goes in bursts. We have spent earlier this year in Brussels a month on it, and we haven't really had time to work on it, but work on the video-related things more. But I think early next year there will be another push to make this more usable. We think how the combination of something that is like organizing your own material, but also organizing as a group. So the metadata in the system is always shared between all the users. You don't, so if you change metadata for a book, everyone else in your circle gets an update. So one problem we have with is that I think we have large collections of books, but we don't really know what they are. So it's more like you already have a large dump of books somewhere on a hard drive, but you don't really know what it is. And maybe this can be a way of finding out together what, or like organizing the material. And maybe highlighting things that are interesting inside already on your hard drive.
Is that online already?
Yes, so I said right now open the website. Some of this thing starts to do weird things. So on openmedialibrary.com you can download the software and install it or start it.
And I think the interesting thing is that it's no longer centered so much about individuals should use this for, this is more for syncing with other people's libraries. This is not about a global peer-to-peer network where you see everyone in the network, but where you pick your peers that are kind of the libraries that you want to have on your horizon. So it's a slightly different paradigm for sharing and syncing. We don't have to, I mean, I can, as a very last thing, prove that this actually works, that you can actually have a this is like a, we call this a smart edit. This is just you search for and see what's done here. You basically just give the website a query. So this in this case is query title contains the wire and subtitles contains Omar. That's pretty easy. Then you sort this thing. You sort it by title, which is number of episodes. So this gives you a chronological order. This is not going to play for very long again because of internet reasons, but this is and there's no sound, but it doesn't matter so much. This is like the story of a character through 60 hours of film. How else would you want to?
I went to the trouble with Chris and Omar. I say that's the Omar.
So there are questions or comments.
Maybe this is kind of a comment, or this was, you know, this kind of flash which coming into your brain when you see a certain kind of image. So maybe it's totally far-fetched and out of the context. But when I saw then all this nice layouts of the films and the story of having them around private, putting them in the archive and so on, I was somehow thinking it's a very Western opportunity of accessibility to this material and then making something around like piracy. And in this moment I was thinking, well, alright, if we going in museums nowadays and we pay an entrance fee of 20 euro and we go to the Pergamon altar, we see it's the same thing. We see stolen stuff. And so I was, when we going back to the structure of this discussing the cultural approach of what we're doing there, besides the possibilities of the technology, what does that mean that at least we, from our Western perspective, and maybe others also have it, speaking mostly of a culture which is growing from the position of the chief.
Chief.
Yeah.
Thief.
Thief. Yeah, you know this chief. TH for Germans is impossible.
Yes, even though, I mean, obviously this is a bit of a polemic kind of thing because copying films is definitely not stealing, like robbing some country's kind of artifacts or something. It's a bit of a different thing. It's just that you don't need authorization to archive. If you would have needed authorization, if you would need authorization to archive, there would be no archives because no one would ever authorize any of this. You have to do it. And you shouldn't wait for.
Don't get me wrong.
No, I'm not. I mean,
I'm speaking about a cultural base on which we operating in this idea of copying and also of the protection. It's not that I'm now moral and ethically wise complaining about the fact that these things are there, but what kind of landscape of thinking in this we are operating. But maybe.
Somehow I get the impression from the question that this idea, okay, you can do that because all the films are around, but what now? Right? And for me it's a way, anyone who's ever been to a digital archives conference knows the story of someone coming up, telling about their project. It has cost 100 million euros, and now you're invited to go to their basement to one authorized screen to look at all of that. Right? And so for me, you can see two things. On the one hand, you can see very established institutions that have historically done a really good job shooting themselves in the foot in a very big way. And you see two answers to that. Right? The one is kind of the Google answer that says we do it anyway and try to sue us. And in the end, this is what I think Dressler was asking for. You will get a settlement, you get a junior position in the new order, and they're negotiating the settlement at the moment, it seems to me. Or you do it kind of the Pirate Bay way, or the way like this, or the public library, that you say that established institutions are no longer capable, for a lot of reasons that we don't have to discuss, to provide the service that they have historically provided, or take over the function they have historically provided. And I think the chances to think about these functions and other institutions that can now take over at least some of those functions by providing access and all of that. And with that comes, I think, a very different way of thinking about curating these or putting things in the archive, where the single archivist, as kind of a gatekeeper in the sense of Goldsmith or his Ubu will play a very different role. So for me, I think these are really a chance also to think about archives that have multiple logics embedded in it, that are not one overriding kind of archival principle. And that apparently established archives cannot do.
And some archives are tactical, some are strategic. You can work on multiple archives that are totally conflicting in scope, ideology, and approach. I mean, this is a pirate movie archive, which is a nice collection. It's a bit like UbuWeb. It's tightly idiosyncratic. But you can. We have another project with the same software where the National Film Archive of Afghanistan is in it, and it's in no other place online than in this. And it's a fantastic archive. There's individuals or groups, collaborators using this. They do archives, not in the sense of national archives or cultural heritage. These are activists between Istanbul, Beirut, Cairo, who in the last 3-4 years have shot a lot of video and trying to make sense of this. These are good tools for this as well. People are using it in universities, people are using it in film production. It's multi-purpose, and there's no contradiction. There's no contradiction there. It's just about the kind of the. It's really, really hard to work top down, to work from the institution to something, whatever they call it, sexy or popular. It's really hard to do that because these structures are just so wrong. If you websites or internet projects done by more than 2 people, maybe some you can do them at 3, but once you see 4 people hired as programmers, you know the story, which is failure. It doesn't work that way. And there's a huge kind of cultural, political, and cultural and political gap between most institutions and approaches to building new technology.
I think that part of the problem is also the lack of knowledge. I think that all of these are the results of the developing some software, and then people usually think of that as tools which will solve the problems, but the software tools in that sense are mainly and primarily the means of the organizational change for whoever is trying to do that. So sometimes it works because you have someone who will enforce that, because there is some like a super restrictive management who will just like make the workforce disciplined and then do that. But that, especially in the institutions we are talking about, that's not the case. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. And I think that there is a need to transfer that knowledge, and that's, I unfortunately don't have a better name than media theory, where that is not the knowledge of a technology in that sense. That's the historizing, theorizing, the very kind of like everything what is like embodied in that single moment when you get, because what you just showed here, I'm sure that most of the directors of the film aircraft would just say like, wow, we buy it. But then when they get into the chance to see it, but then that chance to see it in use or demonstration or whatever goes through their understanding of media, their understanding, like building that knowledge. So it's almost impossible to imagine that that will happen, and that doesn't happen because of the lack of knowledge, not necessarily and not always because there is a huge political decision. And I think that that transfer of knowledge of what you know, for years I thought that this is kind of easy, and there are many people who know that. But unfortunately, I think that it's very rare, that kind of knowledge which is really in between technology, which is in between social kind of theory, which is in that space. And that's what I see as the biggest one, how to bring these fields into that space in between. That's the challenge. And unfortunately, again, I don't know how to do that. There are like the reason. I can tell you just for this software, you did it without almost any money. This is in the startup context, millions of dollars. I know also the technical background. Well, how that happens that you guys can get it, and some like other inside of the industry which understand that they got like millions and then they fail. So it's not, in that sense, it's not a big surprise that Europeana then fails like miserably after millions of dollars, and also showing how much they don't understand it. But they don't understand it also because that institution is a result of negotiations in between other institutions which don't have a clue what they are talking about. So it's not necessarily always just the politics. It's just, I can see that there is a certain knowledge which is lacking, and I don't know how to get there.
Yeah, but I mean also besides maybe this lacking knowledge in these or these spaces between established fields that allow for moving somewhere. I think an important point with something like Pandora as an example. I mean, when we an OECD still states that it's an imaginary database, something that we made also to make an argument. It is in terms of creating the software. It's not only, I mean, the fact that it works and works well is important for this argument, but I mean, the software is an intervention because it's there. It's not something that you could, how would the world look like if this and this would happen, but it's also it's important that you can get to this point. And by that, I mean that idea to say, having an idea and then bringing it to that point where it exists, I think was important for us. Maybe that allowed us to get there.
Also, also I think that many people got the point. We're working with many people on related projects. We do quite a lot, but these are interestingly never institutions, and they're interestingly also never exactly in a specific field. These are these kind of film studies plus law, or madness plus film production, or these kind of activism plus cinema type of strange bastard type of projects that seem to get it. And we've also met institutions and sat with institutions, but usually you leave the space and you sit in a cab and you drive home and you just laugh loud for half an hour because it's unbelievable. It's kind of it's also, you can't do certain things, and that makes life easier.
Maybe I can repeat my point very shortly.
Marcell, shortly.
Yes. So I think that reflects the organizational structure of these. So these people are using all of these kind of tools. They serve, but you can see that the executives are usually not using, and they use mobile phone. It's still, this is the most powerful political communication device. So people who are powerful, they don't have Facebook profiles, they don't need it, they have mobile phones still. So people with mobile phones, metaphorically, they will not get it, not just because they don't want to get it, they don't need it, and this is the way how they stay in power, because other people in power will still keep their phones as their main device if they are not in a room discussing.
Sure, all this is, but I think at the core of it is still, we can only do this the way we want to do this, and the core energy, why this is possible to do this without millions of money, that would be extremely distracting, and is that we want to use this ourselves. We are our users. If you work with people, if you hire software programmers who program some software that they themselves are not going to use for the next 5 years, that this is supposed to be in use, are you crazy? It's like, it doesn't work that way. Architects should also live in the shit they build for a while. You get better results if you have this kind of strange cottage economy of, I make myself a website and now I can share my website. But it's a nicest thing. It's as unsophisticated structurally as Google.
I think I must unfortunately somehow make a cut here because we are running out very much of time. So I would say we make a very short break before we go on with Olia, also because we need to change a little bit the technique. So I would, in 5 to 10 minutes, ask you all to come back.